For decades, I lovingly cared for my grandchildren 3 days a week, until my son's wife decided I was too old and outdated to watch them anymore and dismissed me with a condescending pat on the shoulder. But the day they arrived asking for my signature on documents to access my late husband's trust fund for their new home addition, their rehearsed speech died in their throats. They had no idea that while I was tending to my garden and volunteering at the community center, I had also become a certified early childhood educator with enough qualifications to open a state-licensed daycare center. And I had already allocated the inheritance they expected to receive into creating the most sought-after childcare facility in our neighborhood. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 73, I had envisioned peaceful mornings with my grandchildren, afternoons helping at the local literacy program, and evenings hosting family dinners in the home where my husband Frank and I had raised our family. Instead, I found myself facing a painful reality, being deemed obsolete by my own family despite feeling more capable than ever. My name is Judith Anderson. Frank and I built our lives in the small town of Maplewood, where we raised our 3 children, Michael, Sarah, and Thomas. Frank was a civil engineer while I worked as an accountant, eventually building my own practice serving small businesses throughout our community. We weren't wealthy by national standards, but we lived comfortably, saved carefully, and invested in our children's education. Frank had inherited a modest sum from his parents, which we preserved in a special trust that he had always envisioned would someday help establish our grandchildren's college funds. Money isn't just currency, Frank would often say. It's crystallized opportunity. How we allocate it reflects what we truly value. When Frank passed away 5 years ago after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer, I found myself navigating an unexpected chapter of life. While our financial preparations ensured my stability, nothing could prepare me for the emptiness of our home without his steady presence, his dry humor, or the sound of his favorite jazz records playing on Sunday mornings. In those first months of widowhood, my grandchildren became my greatest comfort. 3 days a week, I would watch Michael and Rebecca's children, Emma and Jack, ages 6 and 4, after preschool, until someone returned from work. We established routines that balanced educational activities with pure fun, baking projects that incorporated measuring in fractions, backyard science experiments, trips to the library, and art projects that covered my dining table with glorious messes. Grandma's house has the best rules, Emma once confided to her mother. We learn stuff without it feeling like school, and we get cookies. Rebecca seemed appreciative during those early years. A marketing executive at a regional firm, she had a demanding career. "We're so lucky to have you," she would say as she picked up the children. "Free childcare from someone who actually loves them. It's the dream scenario." Though her phrasing occasionally gave me pause, reducing my relationship with my grandchildren to free childcare seemed to miss the deeper significance of intergenerational bonds. I understood she was simply acknowledging the practical benefits. The shift began, subtly, around the time Rebecca received a significant promotion. "We're thinking of enrolling Emma in the Bright Horizons after-school program," Rebecca mentioned during a Sunday dinner at my home. "They offer coding classes and Mandarin instruction." "That sounds wonderful as an enrichment opportunity," I replied. "Perhaps she could attend those specific classes a couple days a week? I'd be happy to take her there after she's spent some time here." Rebecca exchanged a quick glance with Michael. "Actually, it makes more sense logistically for her to be enrolled in their full program. It's right near our house, and all her new friends from the neighborhood will be there." "Of course," I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. "What about Jack?" "He'll join the same program next semester when he starts kindergarten," Michael explained. I felt a pang of loss, but reminded myself that this was natural. Children grow, schedules change, new opportunities emerge. "Well, I'm still available. Anytime you need backup care, I offered. Snow days, holidays, summer breaks? Absolutely, Rebecca assured me, though her tone suggested this was more politeness than genuine intention. The following months saw a steady decrease in my childcare responsibilities. When I did have the children, Rebecca began providing detailed instructions about activities, snacks, and educational content. Try to work on these sight word flash. Cards with Jack, she'd say, handing me professionally printed cards. And Emma needs to practice her piano for exactly 30 minutes. The app on this tablet will track her progress. The spontaneous, relationship-building activities that had characterized our earlier time together were gradually replaced by structured tasks monitored through educational apps. When I suggested a cookie baking session one rainy afternoon, Emma looked up confused. But Mom said we need to complete this math module before she picks us up, she explained, showing me the timer counting down on her tablet. I began to feel less like a grandmother and more like an educational assistant implementing someone else's curriculum. Still, I adapted, finding ways to infuse joy into even the most structured activities. Then came the week that changed everything. Rebecca called on Monday morning, her voice tight with stress. Judith, I have a massive client presentation that got moved up, and our regular sitter has the flu. Could you possibly take the kids after school today through Wednesday? Of course, I replied without hesitation. You know I'm always happy to have them. Those 3 days were a gift, a return to more relaxed, joy-filled time. With Rebecca working late and Michael traveling for business, there were no rigid schedules to follow. We visited the park, started a small container garden on my patio, and baked cookies with plenty of sprinkles. When Rebecca arrived Wednesday evening to pick up the children, she looked both exhausted and triumphant. The presentation was a success, she announced. They loved the campaign concept. As Emma showed her mother the small basil plant she had potted, Rebecca's expression shifted. You started a gardening project? That's messy. Just small containers, I explained. They were fascinated by the idea that food comes from somewhere before the grocery store. Rebecca nodded distractedly, then noticed the baking supplies still visible on the kitchen counter. You've been baking too? I hope you kept the sugar content reasonable. We're really trying to monitor their processed sugar intake. Before I could respond, Jack bounded into the room, proudly holding a slightly lopsided clay figure. Look what I made with Grandma. It's a dinosaur dragon. Rebecca examined the creation with a tight smile. That's creative. Did you work on your sight words while you were here, buddy? Jack's expression fell slightly. We read dinosaur books, and Grandma helped me sound out the hard words. An uncomfortable silence followed as Rebecca gathered their belongings. As they prepared to leave, I handed her a small container of cookies. Just a few for their lunchboxes if you decide that works for them, I said, careful to acknowledge her authority. She accepted the container with a distracted nod, then hesitated at the door. Thanks again for helping on such short notice. We do appreciate it, though. Well, we should probably talk about some more structured arrangements for emergency care going forward. That conversation happened the following weekend, though in retrospect, it wasn't really a conversation at all. Rebecca and Michael arrived without the children, which immediately signaled that serious matters would be discussed. Mom, Michael began, using the gentle tone that Frank had always called his breaking bad news voice. Rebecca and I have been talking about childcare arrangements, especially for those unexpected situations that come up. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression professionally sympathetic. We value everything you've done for the children, Judith. You've been a tremendous help during these early years. Something in her phrasing, the past tense, the summative tone, sent a warning signal through my mind. But we think it's time we developed a more structured professional solution for their care, she continued. The children are at critical developmental stages, and consistency in educational approach is essential. I listened quietly, noting how carefully this presentation had been constructed, how seamlessly they alternated speaking roles. We've researched some excellent professional nanny services, Michael explained. Caregivers with degrees in early childhood education, trained in the latest developmental approaches. The children's needs are becoming more complex, Rebecca added. And frankly, keeping up with modern educational methods and technologies can be challenging, even for professionals in the field. The subtext became increasingly clear. I was being phased out of my grandchildren's regular care, not because of any specific failing, but because of assumptions about my age and capabilities. We've also noticed you seem tired sometimes when we pick them up, Michael said, concern evident in his voice. At your age, having that level of responsibility and energy expenditure might not be sustainable. My age? I repeated, the first words I'd spoken since their presentation began. Mom, you're 73, he said gently. Running after active young children, keeping up with their educational needs, managing their schedules. It's a lot for someone your age. We're just concerned about your well-being. I took a measured breath, considering how to respond to what was clearly a decision already made rather than a consultation. I appreciate your concern, but I'm in excellent health. My doctor just confirmed that at my annual physical. And I've never missed a commitment with the children due to fatigue or any other issue. Rebecca nodded in a way that somehow managed to seem both sympathetic and dismissive. It's not just about physical energy, though. That's certainly a factor. It's also about staying current with educational approaches. Children today are prepared so differently than when you were raising Michael and his siblings. I see, I said quietly. And what role do you envision for me going forward? We absolutely want you to remain an important part of their lives, Michael assured me quickly. Sunday dinners, holidays, special occasions, those connections are irreplaceable. And perhaps occasional afternoons, Rebecca added, though her tone suggested this was a concession. We just think consistent daily, or emergency care might be better handled by someone with formal training in contemporary childhood development. The remainder of the conversation focused on their plans for a professional nanny and the specialized activities they hope to incorporate. I maintained a composure that revealed nothing of the hurt building beneath the surface. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca placed a hand on my shoulder with what seemed intended as reassuring affection, but felt more like a patronizing pat. This is really for the best, Judith. You've earned a rest after all your years of child raising. Now you can just enjoy being a grandmother without all the responsibility. After they left, I sat alone, surrounded by subtle evidences of my grandchildren's presence. A small jacket forgotten on a hook, a child's drawing magnetized to my refrigerator, building blocks stored in a basket beside the sofa. The pain I felt wasn't just about reduced time with Emma and Jack. It was about being dismissed as irrelevant, deemed inadequate based on assumptions about age rather than actual capabilities. That evening, I called my daughter Sarah, seeking perspective from someone who knew both me and the family dynamics at play. They did what? Sarah's indignation was immediate. Mom, that's ridiculous. You're more engaged and energetic with those kids than half the younger parents I know. And your experience is an asset, not a liability. Rebecca seems convinced that professional certification trumps decades of practical experience, I explained. Sure, educational methods change, Sarah acknowledged, but the fundamentals of what children need don't. Love, security, patience, boundaries, creative engagement. You provide all of those in abundance, and you've always been a lifelong learner. Her support was comforting, but it didn't change the reality of the situation. Michael and Rebecca had made their decision, and forcing the issue would only create tension that would ultimately affect my relationship with my grandchildren. As I prepared for bed that night, I remembered conversations with Frank about our approach to parenting and grandparenting. He had firmly believed that intergenerational involvement created the richest environment for children's growth. Children who spend time with grandparents develop a sense of history and continuity, he'd often said. They learn that knowledge comes in many forms, not just from the latest research or technology. Those thoughts led me to consider what options might be available beyond simply accepting my reduced role. If current credentials were the issue, perhaps there were ways to acquire formal validation for the knowledge I already possessed. The next morning, I began researching educational opportunities related to early childhood development. To my surprise, our community college offered a certificate program specifically designed for people with practical experience seeking formal credentials. Even more interesting, they had a special track for encore career students, older adults pursuing new credentials to either validate existing skills or develop new ones. As I explored further, I discovered a network of experienced educators and caregivers pursuing similar paths. People with decades of practical knowledge seeking formal certification to continue contributing their gifts in a society that increasingly prioritized credentials over experience. 2 days after my conversation with Michael and Rebecca, I registered for the Early Childhood Education Certificate program at Maplewood Community College. The advisor who helped me enroll expressed genuine enthusiasm about my participation. "We need more students with your life experience," she told me. "You'll bring perspective that enriches the entire program, especially for our younger students who have theoretical knowledge but limited practical application." Over the next several months, I immersed myself in coursework that both validated much of what I already knew from experience and introduced me to newer approaches. I discovered that while terminology and techniques had evolved, many innovative approaches were actually returns to educational philosophies that had cycled in and out of favor over decades. As I progressed through the program, my engagement with my grandchildren continued on the reduced schedule Michael and Rebecca had established. Sunday dinners remained our consistent connection, though these too had subtly changed. Rebecca increasingly structured these gatherings around the children's busy activity schedules. When conversation turned to the children's development, Rebecca would often speak with authority about the professional approaches their new nanny was implementing. I listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that my coursework had prepared me to explore more deeply. The first time I referenced current research on play-based learning, Rebecca's surprise was evident. "You're familiar with Dr. Hartwell's work?" she asked, clearly not expecting such specific knowledge. "We just covered his latest research in my early childhood development course," I explained. "His longitudinal studies on structured versus unstructured play environments are fascinating." The momentary shift in her expression, a recalibration of assumptions, provided a small but meaningful satisfaction. As my coursework continued, I began developing a specific focus on intergenerational learning environments, spaces where children benefit from interaction with adults of varying ages. My final project involved designing such an environment, complete with spatial layouts, curriculum approaches, and staffing considerations. My instructor was particularly impressed with my proposal. "Have you considered actually implementing something like this?" she asked after my presentation. "There's significant demand for innovative childcare approaches, especially those that incorporate the strengths of experienced caregivers alongside younger staff." Her question catalyzed thoughts that had been forming throughout my studies. The research I had conducted revealed a significant gap in our community's childcare landscape, a shortage of high-quality, developmentally appropriate care options. The waiting lists for respected centers stretched many months, and home-based options varied tremendously in quality. That evening, I found myself reviewing financial documents that Frank and I had established years earlier. Among them was the trust containing the inheritance from his parents, funds preserved specifically for our grandchildren's future education. The terms were clear. I maintained control as trustee until the funds were dispersed for their intended educational purpose. This was the money that Michael and Rebecca had increasingly referenced in recent conversations, funds they assumed would eventually transfer to their control. Rebecca had made casual references to home renovations that would create better learning environments for the children, thinly veiled suggestions that the trust funds might be redirectable to projects she deemed educational. As I considered the trust document, Frank's voice seemed to echo, "Money is crystallized opportunity. How we allocate it reflects what we truly value." What if the most valuable educational opportunity I could provide wasn't just a future college fund, but an immediate learning environment that embodied the intergenerational approach I had been researching? A place where children could benefit from both contemporary methods and the wisdom of experienced caregivers? The idea took hold with surprising force. I began researching requirements for establishing a licensed childcare center, exploring available commercial properties, and developing financial projections based on my accounting background. The more I investigated, the more viable the concept appeared, not just educationally sound, but potentially sustainable as a business. I was in the midst of these explorations when Michael called to schedule what he described as an important family financial discussion. The timing suggested they had specific plans for the trust funds. When they arrived the following weekend, without the children once again, Michael carried a folder of documents, and Rebecca's confident smile suggested certainty about the outcome of our meeting. "Mom," Michael began, "we wanted to talk with you about the education trust that Dad established for the children." "Of course," I replied, maintaining a neutral expression. Frank was very specific about wanting to support Emma and Jack's educational opportunities. "Exactly," Rebecca interjected eagerly. "And that's precisely what we want to discuss. We've been researching some significant home improvements that would create optimal learning environments for both children." She outlined an elaborate plan involving converting their basement into a STEAM learning center, creating a music studio, and renovating their backyard to incorporate natural learning elements. The total project would require accessing about 60% of the trust funds, Michael explained, opening his folder to reveal detailed contractor estimates and design plans. "But we see this as an investment in their educational future that aligns perfectly with Dad's intentions." I listened attentively, asking relevant questions about their plans that my recent studies had prepared me to explore with expertise. How would these spaces be integrated into the children's daily learning routines? What research supported the specific designs they had selected? Rebecca seemed initially pleased by my questions, but grew increasingly less confident as the specificity of my inquiries revealed deeper knowledge than she had anticipated. "These are all details we're still developing," she finally acknowledged. "But we've consulted with educational design specialists who assure us this approach represents best practices." I nodded thoughtfully, then reached for a folder of my own, one containing the legal documents establishing the trust, which I had reviewed thoroughly. "I've been considering the trust's purposes carefully," I explained, "especially in light of current research on early childhood development. Frank was very specific about supporting the children's education, and I take that responsibility seriously." Michael nodded encouragingly. "Exactly. And these improvements would create daily educational opportunities right in our home." "That's one approach," I acknowledged. "But after considerable research and consultation with both legal and educational experts, I've determined that the trust funds would best fulfill Frank's intentions through a different investment." I opened my folder and removed a professional business plan document emblazoned with the logo, Generations Learning Center, where wisdom meets wonder. "What is this?" Rebecca asked, confused by this unexpected direction. "My proposal for establishing a licensed early childhood education center based on intergenerational learning principles," I explained calmly. "A place where children benefit from both contemporary educational approaches and the wisdom of experienced caregivers across age ranges. The business plan has been reviewed by both educational consultants and financial advisors, who confirm its viability and alignment with current best practices." The stunned silence that followed was precisely what I had anticipated. This was clearly not the conversation they had expected. "You're planning to start a daycare?" Michael finally managed, his voice reflecting disbelief. "An accredited early learning center," I corrected gently. "Staffed by a combination of credentialed early childhood educators, including myself. I'll be completing my certification next month, and other experienced caregivers with specialized training." Rebecca found her voice, though it had lost its earlier confidence. "But the trust funds were meant for Emma and Jack's education. How does starting a business accomplish that?" "In multiple ways," I explained, turning to the relevant section of my business plan. "First, Emma and Jack will have guaranteed places at the center, providing them with a high-quality early learning environment during their formative years. Years that research consistently identifies as critical for later educational success." Turned another page, revealing financial projections based on my accounting experience. "Second, the business model includes a scholarship component that will grow as the center becomes established, eventually providing funds for not just Emma and Jack's future education, but potentially for other children in need of financial support. Most importantly," I continued, "the center will embody exactly what Frank valued most about education, not just academic preparation, but the development of well-rounded individuals who benefit from diverse perspectives and intergenerational wisdom." The path forward would require significant effort and navigation of family dynamics. But at 73, I had learned that new beginnings can emerge at any age, often from the very experiences that seem at first to be endings. The silence in my living room stretched for what felt like minutes after I revealed my plans for Generations Learning Center. Rebecca's confident smile had vanished, and Michael stared at the business plan as if it were written in a foreign language. "This is unexpected," Michael finally said, his voice carefully controlled. He glanced at Rebecca, whose expression had shifted from surprise to something closer to calculation. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since shortly after you decided. I was too outdated to care for my own grandchildren," I replied, keeping my tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "It started as simply pursuing education to stay current, but evolved as I recognized a genuine need in our community." Rebecca reached for the business plan, her marketing executive persona reasserting itself. "May I?" she asked, already pulling the folder toward her. I nodded, watching as she began scanning the executive summary with professional scrutiny. "You've really thought this through," she said after a moment, surprise evident in her voice. "The market analysis is quite thorough." 40 years of accounting experience didn't vanish when I retired, I reminded her. "And I've had excellent advisors, including former clients from my practice who specialize in small business development." Michael was reviewing the financial projections, his expression increasingly troubled. "Mom, this is a significant undertaking. The startup costs alone are substantial, and the regulatory requirements for childcare facilities are extremely demanding." "All accounted for in the implementation timeline," I said, turning to the relevant section. "The licensing process takes approximately 6 months, during which renovation of the property can be completed. I've already had preliminary discussions with state regulators about the specific requirements." "But at your age," Michael began, falling back on the familiar concern. "My age provides me with experience, perspective, and connections that will benefit this center tremendously," I interrupted gently but firmly. "And as you'll see in the staffing plan, I'm not proposing to personally handle the daily physical demands of childcare. My role combines governance, financial oversight, and specialized educational components aligned with my certification." Rebecca looked up from the business plan, her marketing mind clearly processing implications beyond the immediate financial discussion. "This concept of intergenerational learning is actually quite trendy right now," she observed. "There's been significant media coverage of similar programs in Europe. From a branding perspective, it has potential. I wasn't surprised by her approach. Rebecca had always been skilled at recalibrating quickly when faced with unexpected circumstances, finding ways to align new developments with her own objectives. The research strongly supports the benefits, I agreed. Children who regularly interact with older adults show enhanced empathy, communication skills, and social confidence. Meanwhile, older adults engaged in meaningful work with children demonstrate improved cognitive function and emotional well-being. Michael was still focused on the financial aspects, but this would essentially deplete the trust fund Dad established for Emma and Jack's college expenses. How does that fulfill his intentions? Frank always believed that education begins long before college, I reminded him, feeling my late husband's presence almost tangibly in the room. He frequently said that the early years create the foundation for all future learning. This center provides Emma and Jack with access to exceptional early education during those critical formative years. I turned to the section detailing the scholarship program that would be established as the center became profitable. Additionally, the business model includes reinvestment of profits into a scholarship fund that will grow over time. By the time Emma and Jack reach college age, their designated portion of that fund should equal or exceed what the trust would have provided if left untouched, while also having funded years of exceptional early education. Rebecca was now examining the architectural renderings for the proposed center. This property on Maple Street, isn't that the old Westview Medical Building? It's been vacant for years. Yes, and the owner is motivated to sell, I confirmed. The location is ideal, central to 3 school districts, adjacent to the community park, and with sufficient space for both indoor and outdoor learning environments. The building needs updating but has good bones and already meets many of the structural requirements for a childcare facility. As they continued reviewing the materials, their questions gradually shifted from skepticism about the basic concept toward more specific operational details: staff qualifications, curriculum approaches, marketing strategies, partnership opportunities with local schools. This evolution told me that they were beginning to see the proposal not as a misguided whim, but as a serious business venture with educational merit. Eventually, Rebecca closed the folder and exchanged a long look with Michael. "We need time to process this," she said. "It's quite different from what we expected to discuss today." "Of course," I agreed. "This is a significant shift from the home renovation concept you proposed. Take whatever time you need to review everything thoroughly. I'm happy to answer any additional questions or connect you with members of my advisory team who can address specific concerns." As they prepared to leave, Michael paused at the door. "Mom, I have to ask, is this because you were hurt by our decision about the childcare arrangements? Because if that's driving this isn't about hurt feelings." "Michael," I interrupted gently, "though I won't pretend that being dismissed as outdated wasn't painful. This is about recognizing an opportunity to create something valuable. For Emma and Jack, for other children in our community, and yes, for myself and other experienced caregivers who have much to contribute but are often overlooked." After they left, I sat in my garden, feeling both drained and oddly energized. The conversation had gone largely as I had anticipated, initial shock giving way to reluctant recognition of the plan's merits. What I hadn't fully prepared for was how empowering it would feel to present a vision that reflected not just my response to being sidelined, but a genuine opportunity to create something meaningful. The next day, I received a text message from Rebecca asking if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. This was unusual, as our interactions typically occurred within the context of family gatherings with Michael present. I agreed, curious about what approach she might take without my son as mediator. We met at Rosewood Cafe, a quiet spot away from Maplewood's main commercial area. Rebecca arrived in full professional mode, dressed in a tailored suit with her laptop bag in hand, a sharp contrast to my casual slacks and cardigan. The power dynamic she was attempting to establish wasn't subtle. Thank you for meeting me, she began after ordering an elaborate espresso drink that she specified in precise detail. I wanted to discuss your proposal directly, businesswoman to businesswoman. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. Rebecca had always been most comfortable when approaching situations from a professional angle, treating personal matters with the same strategies she applied in corporate settings. Your business plan is impressively thorough, she acknowledged, removing a copy from her bag with sections neatly highlighted and annotated. I've reviewed similar proposals in my consulting work, and frankly, yours stands up well against professionally developed plans. Thank you, I replied simply. I've had excellent guidance from several former clients with relevant expertise. The concept itself has merit, she continued. Intergenerational learning environments are gaining attention in educational circles, and there's certainly market demand for innovative childcare approaches. She hesitated, then added, the branding potential is particularly strong. The wisdom of experience combined with contemporary educational methods creates a compelling narrative. I recognized that Rebecca was processing my proposal primarily through her professional lens, evaluating its market positioning rather than its personal implications. This was actually helpful. Her marketing expertise provided valuable perspective on aspects of the center's development that would be crucial for its success. I sense there's more you want to discuss than just your professional assessment, I prompted, after she had outlined several suggestions for strengthening the center's market positioning. Rebecca set down her coffee cup with precise movements. Michael is struggling with this, she said bluntly. He sees it as rejection of the careful plans we've made for the children's education. And how do you see it? I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective separated from my son's reaction. I see a business opportunity with merit, she replied without hesitation. But also significant risks, particularly given the timeline. You're proposing to launch a new business venture at an age when most people are simplifying their responsibilities, not expanding them. The timeline is ambitious, I acknowledged, but not unrealistic with the team I've assembled. And regarding my age, many of the most successful businesses in America were founded by people over 50. Experience and established networks can offset the energy advantage of youth. Rebecca tapped manicured nails against her coffee cup. What if we were to propose a compromise? A structure that maintains your involvement and implements aspects of your educational vision while addressing our concerns about Emma and Jack's college funding? I'm open to discussion, I said carefully. What did you have in mind? A hybrid approach, she suggested. Allocate perhaps half of the trust fund to your center as an investment rather than expenditure. Structure it as a formal business loan with repayment terms that would restore the college fund over time. Meanwhile, the remaining trust funds stay reserved for their original purpose. It was a reasonable proposition from a purely financial perspective, though it would significantly reduce the scope of the center I had envisioned. Still, negotiation was expected, and maintaining an open dialogue served my longer-term goals, better than rigid adherence to my original plan. A creative approach, I acknowledged, though it would require scaling back several key elements of the center and potentially delay opening. Rebecca nodded, clearly having anticipated this concern. Which specific elements would be most impacted? Perhaps there are alternative funding sources for certain aspects. Our conversation shifted to a detailed analysis of which components of my vision were essential versus those that could be modified or phased in over time. Rebecca's business acumen was genuinely helpful in identifying creative funding alternatives and prioritizing features that would have the most immediate impact on quality. By the time we finished our coffees, we had outlined a modified approach that preserved the core educational philosophy while adjusting the financial structure. The revised plan would still create the intergenerational learning environment I envisioned, though at a somewhat smaller scale initially, with provision for expansion as the business established itself. I'll need to review these modifications with my advisors, I told her as we prepared to leave. And of course, any changes to the trust allocation would require formal legal review. Rebecca nodded, gathering her materials with efficient movements. Of course, Michael and I will need to discuss this revised approach as well. But I think this framework addresses the primary concerns while respecting your vision. As we walked to the parking lot, Rebecca paused, her professional demeanor softening slightly. For what it's worth, Judith, I am impressed by how thoroughly you've approached this. When Michael first told me you were taking early childhood education courses, I assumed it was, well, more of a hobby than a professional development strategy. The comment revealed volumes about her fundamental assumptions regarding my capabilities and motivations. We never truly stop growing, Rebecca, I replied mildly. At any age. Over the next several weeks, discussions continued about the modified financing approach. My advisory team evaluated the revised structure, making adjustments to ensure the center's viability with reduced initial funding. Michael gradually shifted from resistance to reluctant acknowledgement that the concept had merit, particularly after Emma asked why Grandma wasn't watching them anymore and expressed disappointment with the rigid schedule their new nanny maintained. Meanwhile, I continued my certification coursework and began more formal discussions with the owners of the Westview Medical Building. The property had been on the market for nearly 2 years, and the owners were responsive to creative financing approaches that would facilitate the sale. My past accounting clients provided valuable guidance on structuring the purchase agreement to maximize available resources. A particularly significant development occurred when I presented the center concept to my early childhood education cohort at the community college. Professor Martinez, who had been supportive throughout my studies, suggested that Generations Learning Center might qualify as a practicum site for future students in the program. The intergenerational model you're proposing offers valuable, educational opportunities for our students, she explained after class. If you're open to hosting student teachers, we could formalize a partnership that would benefit both your center and our program. This possibility addressed one of the staffing challenges in my original plan. Student teachers would provide enthusiastic support staff under appropriate supervision, while gaining hands-on experience in an innovative learning environment. The potential partnership added credibility to the center's educational approach and opened access to additional resources through the college. 6 weeks after my initial presentation to Michael and Rebecca, we convened again at my home for a formal discussion of the revised approach. This time, my advisory team joined us. Marjorie Williams, a retired elementary school principal. David Chen, a commercial real estate attorney who had been a longtime client of my accounting practice. And Professor Martinez, representing both her educational expertise and the potential community college partnership. The presence of these respected professionals clearly impacted Michael and Rebecca's approach to the discussion. The dynamic had shifted from family negotiation to serious business consideration, reinforcing the legitimacy of the center concept. Rebecca, in particular, engaged actively with my team, her marketing expertise complementing their educational and legal perspectives. After 2 hours of detailed discussion, we reached consensus on a modified approach that preserved the educational vision while restructuring the financial model. 60% of the trust funds would be allocated to the center as a combination of investment and secured loan, with specific provisions for repayment that would ultimately enhance rather than deplete the children's educational resources. The remaining 40% would stay reserved for future higher education expenses. This approach actually provides the best of both worlds, David explained as he outlined the legal structure. The children benefit from exceptional early education. Now, while their financial resources for college are protected and potentially enhanced through their grandmother's business acumen. As the meeting concluded, Michael pulled me aside while Rebecca was engaged in conversation with Professor Martinez about marketing strategies for student recruitment. "Mom, I need to ask you something," he said quietly. "Is this really what you want to be doing at this stage of your life? Running a business is stressful and demanding, After everything you and Dad accomplished, you've earned a peaceful retirement." His concern seemed genuine, which softened my response. "Michael, what makes you think a peaceful retirement would bring me fulfillment? Your father and I always believed in continued growth and contribution. This center combines my financial skills, my love for children, and my belief in intergenerational learning in a way that creates value for our whole community." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Dad would probably love this idea, wouldn't he? He always said you were the visionary in the partnership." "He would see the potential," I agreed, feeling a wave of emotion at Frank's mention. "And he'd appreciate that his legacy is creating opportunity for not just his own grandchildren, but many others as well." The weeks that followed brought a flurry of activity as our plans moved from concept to implementation. The property purchase was finalized with terms favorable to our startup timeline. Architectural plans were submitted for the renovations needed to meet childcare facility requirements. Recruitment began for key staff positions, with an emphasis on combining experienced educators with energetic newcomers to the field. Throughout this period, my relationship with Michael and Rebecca continued evolving. While not without occasional tension, our interactions increasingly focused on practical collaboration rather than philosophical differences. Rebecca's marketing expertise proved valuable in developing materials for the center, while Michael's network of business contacts helped secure favorable terms with contractors and suppliers. A pivotal moment occurred 3 months into the implementation process, when the walls of the former medical building had been reconfigured, but finishes and furnishings were still to come. I invited Emma and Jack to visit the space with their parents, wanting them to feel involved in the creation of what would become an important part of their daily lives. "This is going to be your school, Grandma?" Emma asked incredulously as she explored the partially completed classrooms. At 7, she was old enough to understand the concept, though the scale clearly surprised her. "Not just mine," I explained, kneeling to her level despite my arthritic knee. "It's a special place where children and people of different ages will learn together. You and Jack will be able to come here after school if you'd like." Jack, now 5, was examining the outline of what would become a science exploration area. "Will we get to do experiments? My friend Lucas goes to a place that has real microscopes." "We'll absolutely have microscopes," I assured him. "And lots of other equipment for discovering how things work." As the children explored, I noticed Rebecca watching them with an expression I hadn't seen before, a mixture of assessment and something that might have been grudging admiration. "They're excited," she observed when the children ran ahead to investigate another room. "More excited than they've been about their current after-school program lately." Children respond to environments that balance structure with genuine exploration, I replied. "That's central to our philosophy here, providing the framework for learning while honoring children's natural curiosity." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "The Bright Horizons program has become increasingly test-focused this year. Emma complains about worksheet time every afternoon." She hesitated, then added, "Their director mentioned they're adjusting their curriculum to better align with standardized testing expectations." "There's certainly a place for assessment," I acknowledged, "but not at the expense of discovery and joy in learning. Our approach will incorporate measurable outcomes within the context of project-based exploration." As we continued touring the facility, Rebecca asked increasingly specific questions about the curriculum and daily schedule, comparing elements to Emma and Jack's current program. Her questions reflected not just professional curiosity, but personal assessment as a parent, a subtle but significant shift from her previous focus on credentials and contemporary techniques. The culmination of this shift came as we were preparing to leave. Emma tugged at her mother's hand and asked with direct childhood simplicity, "Mom, can we come to Grandma's school instead of the other place? This looks way more fun." Rebecca hesitated, glancing at me before responding. "Well, honey, Grandma's school isn't open yet, But when it is, we'll definitely consider it as an option. Consider it? Emma persisted with the negotiating skill she'd clearly inherited from both parents. But Grandma will be here, and she lets us do cool projects, not just worksheets all the time. An uncomfortable silence followed as Rebecca clearly weighed her response. Michael stepped in smoothly. Grandma's school will have lots of children enrolled, sweetie. We'll need to see if there's space available when it opens. There will absolutely be places for Emma and Jack if you decide that's what you want, I assured them, careful to acknowledge their parental authority while making my position clear. But that's a decision for you and Mom to make together, based on what you think is best. Later that evening, I received an unexpected text from Rebecca. The children haven't stopped talking about Grandma's school all evening. Emma has already packed what she calls her learning bag to bring on opening day. Would like to discuss enrollment options when you have time. This simple message represented a significant concession in our ongoing negotiation of boundaries and influence. Rather than maintaining the position that professional childcare providers were inherently superior to grandmotherly care, Rebecca was acknowledging, perhaps reluctantly, that my approach might actually better serve her children's needs and interests. The following Sunday dinner brought another surprising development. As we were finishing dessert, Rebecca cleared her throat in the manner that typically preceded her important announcements. I've been thinking about Generations Learning Center, she began, using the formal name rather than Grandma's school, her typical way of maintaining professional distance. My firm is actually looking for community partnership opportunities as part of our corporate social responsibility initiative. There might be potential for sponsorship of specific programming, elements, particularly around intergenerational technology education. The offer caught me by surprise. While Rebecca had grudgingly recognized the center's educational merit, she had maintained a careful separation between her professional resources and our family project. That would be tremendously helpful, I replied carefully, especially for the technology infrastructure, which represents a significant portion of our startup budget. I'll have my team draft a formal proposal, she said with characteristic efficiency. We could potentially structure it as a pilot program for digital literacy across generations, something with research components that could generate positive publicity for both the center and the firm. The business justification was classic Rebecca, finding the marketing angle that would make personal support professionally defensible. But beneath the corporate framing, I recognized a meaningful olive branch. She was finding a way to contribute to the center's success without explicitly acknowledging that her earlier dismissal of my capabilities had been misjudged. As implementation progressed, other unexpected allies emerged. Sarah, my daughter, who had been supportive from the beginning, leveraged her connections as a healthcare administrator to facilitate expedited health department reviews. Thomas, my youngest son, arranged for his tech company to donate slightly outdated but perfectly functional computer equipment for the center's digital literacy program. Even members of my garden club and book group, many of whom were retired professionals from fields ranging from education to healthcare to business, began volunteering specialized skills, everything from cataloging library books to designing natural play spaces in the outdoor area. What had begun as my individual response to being dismissed had evolved into a community effort that engaged talents across generations. 6 months after my initial presentation to Michael and Rebecca, Generations Learning Center stood ready for its final inspections. The transformation of the old medical building was remarkable. Bright, inviting spaces designed specifically for different types of learning activities. A commercial kitchen capable of preparing nutritious meals, outdoor play areas that combined natural elements with age-appropriate equipment, and a central gathering space where children and older adults could engage in shared projects. The staffing plan had evolved to include a rich mixture of professionals, certified early childhood educators, retired teachers serving as wisdom mentors, student teachers from the community college, and specialists in areas ranging from music to science to gardening. Our intergenerational approach had attracted significant attention in educational circles, resulting in more qualified applicants than we initially had positions to fill. Most meaningful to me personally was the specialized space designated as the Heritage Skills Studio, an area where older adults from the community would teach traditional crafts and practices ranging from woodworking to quilting to preserving seasonal foods. This space embodied the core philosophy that each generation has valuable knowledge to share, creating a rich exchange that benefits learners of all ages. The day before our final licensing inspection, I received a text message from Rebecca asking if she could drop by the center that evening. When she arrived, she was alone, unusual for our recent interactions, which typically included Michael as a buffer between our sometimes clashing perspectives. "I wanted to see the completed space," she explained as I showed her in. "Michael had a late meeting, but I didn't want to wait." We walked through the silent classrooms and activity areas, the absence of children emphasizing the careful preparation that had gone into creating these learning environments. Rebecca asked detailed questions about specific features: the reading nook with its carefully selected library, the art studio with specialized equipment for different ages, the technology space where her company's sponsorship had provided state-of-the-art tools for digital learning. In the Heritage Skills Studio, she paused before a display of traditional quilting tools that my friend Eleanor had donated from her family collection. "My grandmother used to quilt," she said unexpectedly. "I have one she made for me when I was born. I've kept it in storage because it seemed too old-fashioned for our home's aesthetic." The admission revealed something I hadn't known about Rebecca's own connection to intergenerational learning, a personal link to the very values our center was designed to preserve and promote. "Old-fashioned and timeless aren't the same thing," I observed gently. "Some skills and traditions retain their value across generations, even as approaches and applications evolve." Rebecca nodded slowly, running her fingers over a hand-carved wooden seam guide. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about what gets lost when we focus exclusively on what's new and innovative." We continued our tour, finally ending in my office, a modest space I had insisted remain small so that resources could be directed toward learning areas. On the wall hung a single photograph, Frank and me on our 40th anniversary, surrounded by our children and grandchildren in the garden he had loved tending. Rebecca studied the photo for a long moment. "Judith, I owe you an apology," she said finally, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "When we suggested you were too old to provide appropriate care for Emma and Jack, it wasn't really about your capabilities. It was about control, my need to manage every aspect of their development according to my own vision." The admission clearly cost her considerable effort, and I received it with the respect it deserved. "Parenting is an enormous responsibility," I acknowledged. "The desire to provide the very best for your children is natural and admirable. But the very best isn't always the newest approach or the most credentialed provider," she continued. "What you offered, what you're creating here, incorporates valuable elements I nearly dismissed simply because they didn't fit my preconceived notion of optimal childcare." This conversation represented a breakthrough in our relationship, not just regarding the center or childcare arrangements, but in our fundamental understanding of each other's perspectives and values. Rebecca wasn't surrendering her own educational priorities for her children, but she was acknowledging the legitimacy and value of different approaches, including those rooted in experience and tradition. As she prepared to leave, Rebecca paused at the door. "Emma asked me this morning if, when your school opens, she'll get to bake cookies with you again sometimes. Apparently that's her favorite memory from the days when you watched them regularly." I smiled, remembering those afternoons of measured ingredients and flour-dusted countertops. Our curriculum absolutely includes practical mathematics through cooking projects. And yes, cookies will feature prominently in those lessons. Rebecca laughed. a genuine sound without her usual careful modulation. I suppose there are worse ways to learn fractions. Just maybe whole wheat flour occasionally. We can negotiate the nutritional parameters, I agreed, recognizing the symbolic importance of this small concession to joy over rigid adherence to optimal practices. The following day brought our final licensing inspection, which we passed with flying colors. The inspector, a woman perhaps a decade younger than myself, was particularly impressed by our intergenerational staffing model. "This is exactly the kind of innovative approach we need more of," she remarked as she completed her paperwork. "Combining the energy and recent training of younger staff with the wisdom and patience of experienced educators. You've created something special here, Ms. Anderson." 2 weeks later, Generations Learning Center officially opened its doors with a celebration that brought together all who had contributed to its creation. My advisory team, staff members, community partners, student teachers, and families of enrolled children. Emma and Jack proudly showed their parents around Grandma's school, now filled with the energy and noise of children exploring their new learning environment. As I watched Michael and Rebecca engaging with other parents, I noticed a shift in their interaction with me, a new respect that went beyond family obligation. They were witnessing firsthand how the educational vision I had described in abstract terms had manifested in concrete reality, and the evidence of its value was unmistakable in the engaged learning happening throughout the center. Late in the Yao Ai celebration, I found a quiet moment to step into the garden area, needing a brief respite from the joyful chaos. The raised beds we had installed were still freshly planted, waiting for little hands to tend the seedlings and learn about growth and nurturing. A mosaic bird bath that Sarah had helped design caught the afternoon sunlight, casting rainbow patterns across the natural wood of the child-sized garden benches. "So this is where you're hiding," came Rebecca's voice as she joined me in the garden. The parent feedback is overwhelmingly positive, especially about the integration of traditional skills with technology education. Your enrollment projections might actually be conservative. The business elements matter, I acknowledged, but what means most to me is creating a place where children can develop not just academically, but as whole people, connected to history, to nature, to the wisdom of different generations. Rebecca nodded, her professional assessment mode softening into something more reflective. "When I first told you that you were too old to provide the care Emma and Jack needed, I genuinely believed the professional childcare providers we hired would offer superior educational value. But watching the children today, seeing how they engage with both the younger teachers and the older mentors, there's something powerful in that mix that I hadn't fully appreciated." Her admission represented the culmination of a journey that had begun with dismissal and evolved through resistance, negotiation, reluctant acknowledgement, and finally, genuine appreciation. The center itself stood as tangible evidence not just of my capabilities, but of the value that experienced individuals bring to education when their gifts are recognized rather than dismissed. "You know," Rebecca continued, "my company has an executive education program focused on multi-generational workforce dynamics. They've been looking for innovative case studies that demonstrate effective integration of different age groups. Generations. Learning Center would make a compelling example." "An interesting opportunity," I agreed, recognizing yet another way that what had begun as a personal response to being sidelined was evolving into something with broader impact. As we prepared to rejoin the celebration, Rebecca hesitated, then added, "Emma asked me yesterday if you would be her teacher sometimes, or if you'd be too busy running the whole school. She misses her special time with you." The question touched the core of what had motivated this entire journey, not just proving my continued relevance or creating an innovative business, but maintaining meaningful connections with the grandchildren I loved. "The center's director handles day-to-day operations," I explained. "My role includes regular teaching time, specifically in the Heritage Skills Studio. Emma and Jack are both scheduled for sessions there twice weekly. Rebecca smiled, a genuine expression without the careful control she typically maintained. Cookie mathematics on the curriculum? Among other essential life skills, I confirmed with matching humor. Some lessons are indeed timeless. As we walked back inside to where the celebration continued, I felt Frank's presence particularly strongly. His practical wisdom, his belief in continued growth at every age, his understanding that true legacy lies not in money or possessions but in the values and knowledge we pass to future generations. What had begun as a painful dismissal had transformed into something far more meaningful than I could have initially imagined. Not just a business venture or a personal vindication, but a living demonstration of the very principle at the heart of our center. That wisdom and innovation flourish best when different generations learn from and with each other. The conversation Rebecca and I had just shared represented its own form of intergenerational learning, a moment of mutual recognition that transcended our different perspectives and life stages. In acknowledging the value each of us brought to Emma and Jack's development, we had found common ground that promised a more collaborative relationship moving forward. As I watched my grandchildren exploring their new learning environment, Jack crouched intently over a magnifying station examining leaf structures, Emma helping a younger child arrange colored blocks and patterns, I felt a profound sense of purpose. The inheritance that Frank had set aside for their future education was now serving that purpose in ways neither of us could have anticipated, but that honored the values we had shared throughout our marriage. The path ahead would bring new challenges, adjustments, and opportunities for growth, for the center, for my relationship with Michael and Rebecca, and for my own continuing development. But the fundamental truth that had emerged from this journey provided a compass for navigating whatever might come. That age itself is neither qualification nor disqualification for meaningful contribution, that wisdom and innovation are not opposing forces but complementary strengths, and that sometimes the most powerful response to being dismissed is not protest but creation. "Grandma!" Emma called from across the room, waving excitedly. "Come see what we made in the art studio. It's for your office." As I moved to join her, I caught Rebecca's eye across the room. The nod she gave me carried recognition and respect that had been hard-won through months of negotiation, demonstration, and finally collaboration. It was a small gesture, but it symbolized the transformation of a relationship that had begun with dismissal and evolved into something approaching partnership. In that moment, I knew that Generations Learning Center would succeed, not just as a business venture or an educational innovation, but as the embodiment of a truth too often forgotten in our youth-focused culture: that every stage of life brings unique gifts, worth honoring, and that wisdom, like the inheritance that had funded our center, grows most valuable when it's actively invested rather than simply preserved. The first year of Generations Learning Center brought challenges and triumphs I could never have anticipated when this journey began. What had started as a response to being deemed too old to care for my own grandchildren had blossomed into something that touched far more lives than just my family's. As I reflect on this transformation, I'm reminded of something Frank used to say: life's greatest opportunities often arrive disguised as its biggest disappointments. 3 months after our grand opening, our enrollment had reached capacity with a waiting list that surprised even my most optimistic advisors. Parents were drawn to our unique approach, combining traditional educational foundations with innovative programming, all enhanced by the intergenerational staffing model that set us apart from conventional childcare centers. We've had inquiries from families in neighboring counties, Marjorie reported during our quarterly advisory meeting. As our educational director, the retired elementary school principal had become the center's daily operational leader, bringing decades of experience to the role. Some parents are willing to drive 40 minutes each way because they can't find anything similar closer to home. The intergenerational component is clearly our strongest distinguishing factor, added David, reviewing the enrollment demographics. Our surveys show that's the primary draw for nearly 70% of families. This confirmed what I had instinctively believed when developing the concept, that many parents recognize the value of connecting their children with experienced mentors across age groups, providing a richer learning environment than programs staffed exclusively by young educators, however well-credentialed. The Heritage Skills Studio had become particularly popular, with its rotating workshops teaching traditional crafts and practices. Children delighted in learning to bake bread from scratch, construct simple wooden toys, plant gardens according to seasonal rhythms, and create handcrafts using techniques passed down through generations. These activities did more than teach specific skills. They fostered patience, attention to detail, problem-solving, and the satisfaction of creating something tangible, qualities often overlooked in our digital age. My role had evolved as the center established its rhythms. While I maintained oversight of financial operations and strategic planning, I found the greatest joy in teaching specialized workshops in the Heritage Skills Studio and in mentoring our younger staff members, who brought fresh educational approaches, balanced by my practical experience. Emma and Jack had settled into their after-school routines at the center, thriving in an environment that balanced structured learning with creative exploration. 3 afternoons each week, they arrived from their respective schools to join our program, often bringing friends whose parents had enrolled them after hearing enthusiastic reports about Grandma's school. "Ms. Judith, can you show me that special?" "Not again?" called Lily, one of Emma's classmates, during a workshop on simple fiber crafts. "I want to make a friendship bracelet like Emma's." As I demonstrated the technique, I noticed Emma watching proudly. "My grandma can make anything," she informed her friend with absolute confidence. "She taught my dad too, when he was little." These casual moments of intergenerational connection and knowledge transfer represented exactly what I had hoped to create. A space where wisdom was valued regardless of its source, where children developed respect for skills that had sustained families for generations. My relationship with Rebecca continued its gradual transformation during these early months. What had begun as dismissal of my capabilities had evolved through reluctant acknowledgement to something approaching partnership, though not without occasional tension as we navigated new boundaries. 6 months after opening, Rebecca's marketing firm officially featured Generations Learning Center in a case study on innovative community partnerships. The publicity generated substantial positive attention for both the center and her company, leading to speaking invitations for both of us at conferences focused on educational innovation and corporate social responsibility. "The education conference organizers would like us to present together," Rebecca informed me one afternoon as she picked up the children. "They're particularly interested in the intergenerational knowledge transfer model and how it impacts learning outcomes. Would you be comfortable with that?" The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The daughter-in-law who had once deemed me too outdated to care for my grandchildren now proposing we jointly present our approach as an educational innovation. "I think that could be valuable," I replied, appreciating her professional acknowledgement without drawing attention to the evolution it represented. "The research data we've been collecting on learning outcomes would make a compelling presentation." Our collaboration on this presentation marked another milestone in our transformed relationship. As we prepared our materials, Rebecca's marketing expertise complemented my educational background and practical experience, creating a more comprehensive picture than either of us could have presented alone. "You know," Rebecca observed during one of our preparation sessions, "this entire experience has fundamentally changed how I think about expertise and innovation. I had such a narrow definition of what constituted current educational approaches." "How has that perspective shifted?" I asked, genuinely curious about her evolution. She considered the question thoughtfully. "I realize now that I was equating current exclusively with recent, assuming that newer approaches were inherently better than established methods. But what I've seen here is that the most effective learning happens when traditional foundations are enhanced by innovative, Techniques not replaced by them? This insight represented significant growth in Rebecca's understanding, acknowledging the value of experience alongside formal credentials, a perspective that validated exactly what I had tried to demonstrate when she and Michael had dismissed my capabilities. The center's success brought unexpected opportunities beyond our immediate community. 8 months after opening, we received a visit from representatives of a national education foundation interested in our intergenerational model. Their subsequent grant proposal offered funding to document our approach and develop resources that would help other communities implement similar programs. This could extend your impact far beyond what you initially envisioned, David observed during our discussion of the proposal, essentially creating a blueprint for intergenerational learning centers nationwide. The possibility of influencing educational approaches beyond our small community was both exciting and humbling, a reminder that responses to personal challenges can sometimes create ripples affecting many more lives than we anticipate. One particularly meaningful development came through our growing relationship with Maplewood Community College. Professor Martinez had continued her support beyond my certification program, establishing Generations Learning Center as a premier practicum site for early childhood education students. This partnership enriched our staffing with enthusiastic student teachers while providing them valuable experience in our unique learning environment. Your center has become our most requested placement site, Professor Martinez informed me during her quarterly visit. Students specifically ask to complete their practicum here because of the mentoring they receive from your experienced staff. They're getting a type of guidance that's increasingly rare in traditional settings, where they might work primarily with peers close to their own age. This feedback validated another core premise of our approach, that newer educators benefit tremendously from the guidance of experienced mentors, just as children benefit from interaction with adults of different generations. Our first anniversary celebration brought together families, staff, community partners, and the many volunteers who had contributed to our success. The center's grounds were transformed for the occasion, with learning stations throughout the property showcasing the various programs we offered. Children proudly guided their parents through activities they had mastered, from digital storytelling in our technology lab to traditional bread baking in the Heritage Skills Studio. During the celebration, I found a quiet moment to visit my office, needing a brief respite from the joyful chaos. On my desk sat a special gift the children had created for the occasion, a handmade book titled Generations Stories, filled with their illustrations and dictated tales about learning from older family members and center volunteers. Emma's contribution particularly touched me. A carefully drawn picture of us baking together, accompanied by her wobbly handwriting explaining, "My grandma teaches me old ways and new ways together. She says wisdom doesn't get old like milk does. It gets better, like honey that stays sweet forever." Her innocent articulation of the center's philosophy brought tears to my eyes, evidence that our core message was reaching even our youngest participants. A knock at my office door interrupted my moment of reflection. Michael stood in the doorway, his expression unusually soft. "Mom, do you have a minute? There's something I'd like to discuss while we have a moment away from the crowd." I welcomed him in, noting the envelope he carried with characteristic precision, always the careful financial planner, even in personal matters. "Today's celebration has me thinking about where we were a year ago," he began, settling into the chair across from my desk. "About how differently things might have turned out if we hadn't made the assumptions we did about your capabilities." I waited, allowing him space to continue his thought without interruption. "Rebecca and I have been reviewing our family financial plans, particularly regarding the children's education," he continued, placing the envelope on my desk. "We've decided to supplement the trust fund that's been partially allocated to the GAO Center. This represents our personal investment, separate from the original inheritance." I opened the envelope to find documentation of a substantial contribution to the scholarship fund we had established as part of the center's nonprofit educational foundation. "This is incredibly generous," I said, genuinely moved by the gesture. and its significance. It's not just generosity, Michael clarified. It's recognition of value. What you've created here offers educational benefits we couldn't have provided through the home renovations we originally proposed. This investment acknowledges that reality. His framing of the contribution as recognition rather than charity held particular meaning. An admission that my vision had proven more valuable than the alternative they had originally championed. The center's success speaks for itself, I acknowledged, but this validation from you and Rebecca means a great deal to me personally. There's something else, Michael added, his expression suggesting this was the more difficult part of his message. I owe you an apology, Mom. When we suggested you were too old to provide appropriate care for Emma and Jack, that wasn't just Rebecca's position. I was equally responsible for that decision and the way we communicated it. His willingness to take personal responsibility rather than attributing the dismissal primarily to his wife revealed a maturity that made me deeply proud. It would have been easier to let Rebecca bear the brunt of responsibility for a decision that had clearly proven misguided. What I've realized, he continued, is that I was projecting my own anxieties about aging onto you. Watching Dad decline during his illness affected me more deeply than I acknowledged. Somewhere in my mind, I started equating any sign of aging with inevitable decline, missing the distinction between physical challenges and the wisdom that continues growing throughout life. His insight revealed layers of complexity behind their decision that I hadn't fully appreciated. How Frank's illness had shaped my son's perspective on aging in ways that colored his assessment of my capabilities. We all have blind spots shaped by our experiences, I told him gently. What matters is our willingness to reconsider when evidence suggests our assumptions were flawed. Evidence like a thriving educational center that's becoming a model for programs nationwide, he acknowledged with a small smile. Not exactly the declining capabilities we were concerned about. As we rejoined the celebration, I felt a profound sense of completion, not of our work, which continued evolving, but of the personal journey that had begun with dismissal and culminated in this moment of genuine recognition. The party continued into early evening, with families reluctantly departing as darkness fell. As the last guests left, I found myself in the garden area with my advisory team, reflecting on the day's success. I don't think any of us anticipated quite this level of community response when we started, Marjorie observed, gesturing toward the grounds where evidence of the celebration remained. Children's artwork displayed on outdoor panels, the remnants of learning activities throughout the property, photographs documenting our first year's journey. The timing was perfect, David added. There was clearly an unmet need for this approach to early education, but the execution has been exceptional as well. Many good concepts fail in implementation. As we continued our discussion, Rebecca approached our small group, professional, tablet in hand as always. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to share some news before I take the children home. We just received confirmation that the Educational Foundation grant has been approved at the full requested amount. The documentation project can begin next month. This development would provide resources to formally record our methodology, creating materials that could help other communities implement similar programs. What had begun as a personal response to being sidelined was evolving into an educational model with potential national significance. As arrangements for the documentation project took shape in the following weeks, I found myself reflecting on the transformation that had occurred, not just in the creation of Generations Learning Center, but in my own understanding of purpose and legacy at this stage of life. At 74, I had entered a phase that society often characterizes primarily through loss and limitation. The reality I was experiencing couldn't have been more different. Intellectual engagement, meaningful contribution, and new relationships that enriched my life daily. The center provided structure that balanced my need for purpose with flexibility that accommodated the realities of aging, creating a sustainable model that neither denied physical changes nor allowed them to define my capabilities. This balance became particularly important 6 months into our second year, when I experienced a health challenge that temporarily limited my physical activity. A case of shingles, painful but not life-threatening, required several weeks of reduced hours and modified responsibilities. What might once have been ammunition for the argument that I was too old for meaningful contribution instead became a demonstration of the center's resilience and the value of our intergenerational approach. The staff seamlessly adjusted, with younger team members taking on more physically demanding tasks, while I continued contributing through planning, mentoring, and activities that didn't require extensive movement. This is exactly why diverse age groups in the workplace make sense, Rebecca observed during a visit while I was recovering. Everyone has periods of limitation at any age. When you have different generations working together, the team can adapt without losing essential knowledge or capabilities. Her insight represented a complete reversal of her earlier perspective, from seeing age primarily as liability to recognizing the advantages of intergenerational collaboration, even during periods of temporary limitation. As my health improved, and I resumed normal activities, we received news that would further validate our approach and expand its impact. A major education policy journal had selected Generations Learning Center for a feature article highlighting innovative models addressing both childcare quality and workforce development through intergenerational staffing. The resulting publicity brought visitors from across the country, educators, policymakers, and program developers interested in replicating elements of our model in their own communities. Each group toured our facility, observed our programs in action, and met with staff across age ranges to understand how our intergenerational approach functioned in practice. What makes this model particularly relevant, I explained to one delegation of education officials, is its response to two simultaneous challenges: the childcare quality gap affecting young families, and the expertise utilization gap affecting older adults with valuable skills but limited formal credentials. By connecting these groups through structured programs, both benefit tremendously. The growing recognition of our approach coincided with another significant development in my personal journey. Early in our third year, Rebecca's marketing firm offered her an opportunity to lead a new division focused on educational innovation and social impact marketing, a role that would build directly on her experience with Generations Learning Center and similar initiatives. It's a substantial promotion, she explained during a family dinner at my home. But it would involve considerable travel, at least initially, as we establish partnerships with educational organizations nationwide. That sounds like an exciting opportunity, I responded, genuinely pleased by her professional advancement. How are you thinking about managing family logistics with the increased travel? The question hung in the air for a moment, laden with unspoken history. The same concern about childcare arrangements that had initiated our entire journey 3 years earlier. Michael and Rebecca exchanged a glance before she continued. Actually, that's something we wanted to discuss with you. The children have been thriving in the after-school program at Generations, but this new position would occasionally require evening commitments as well. We were hoping, Michael added, carefully, that you might be open to having Emma and Jack stay with you on those evenings when both of us have work commitments, perhaps overnight sometimes, if that wouldn't be too taxing. The irony of this request, coming from the same couple who had once deemed me too old for regular childcare responsibilities, was profound. Rather than highlighting this contradiction, however, I focused on the trust their request represented. Would love to have more time with Emma and Jack, I assured them. My schedule at the center is flexible enough to accommodate evening and occasional overnight care without difficulty. We know it's a lot to ask, Rebecca acknowledged, the formal precision of her usual communication softened by what appeared to be genuine appreciation. Especially given our previous concerns about your caregiving role, which have been thoroughly disproven by the past 3 years, Michael added. his direct acknowledgement of their revised assessment particularly meaningful. "Family circumstances evolve," I responded, choosing graciousness over vindication. "What matters is finding arrangements that serve the children's needs while supporting your professional development, Rebecca. This seems like an appropriate balance." This conversation marked the final transformation of our family dynamic. From their dismissal of my caregiving capabilities to explicit request for expanded involvement, based on 3 years of demonstrated competence, not just with my own grandchildren, but with hundreds of others through the center. The new arrangement brought Emma and Jack to my home several evenings each month, and for occasional overnight stays when Rebecca's travel and Michael's work commitments coincided. These extended visits allowed for the kinds of unhurried interactions that had characterized our relationship before professional childcare providers had been deemed necessary. Board games that stretched into evening hours, bedtime stories that prompted thoughtful conversations, and morning pancake breakfasts featuring whatever creative additions the children desired. "I like staying with Grandma better than with Ms. Peterson," Jack confided to his mother after one such overnight, referring to the professional nanny they still engaged for some childcare needs. "She knows way more cool stories and doesn't check her phone all the time." Rather than becoming defensive about this comparison, Rebecca surprised me by asking for specific observations about their nanny's phone usage and engagement during care hours. "If she's distracted during her time with them, we need to address that directly," she explained. "The whole point of professional childcare is attentive supervision and engagement." This response reflected significant growth in Rebecca's approach, focusing on actual quality of care rather than assumptions based on credentials or age. The professional nanny's youth and formal training no longer automatically trumped concerns about engagement quality, just as my age no longer automatically triggered assumptions about care limitations. As Generations Learning Center continued, flourishing into its 3rd year, we faced a significant decision about potential expansion. Our waiting list had grown consistently, and families frequently requested enrollment for younger siblings or extended family members. Several community partners had suggested we consider opening a second location to meet this demand. "The business case for expansion is compelling," David explained during a strategy meeting with our advisory board. "The financial model has proven sustainable, community demand exceeds our capacity, and the documentation project has created replicable systems that would facilitate consistent implementation at a new site." While the rational case for expansion was clear, I found myself hesitating, concerned about maintaining the personal touch and community connection that defined our approach. "Growth for its own sake has never been our objective," I reminded the group. "We need to ensure that expansion would enhance rather than dilute the quality that makes this center special." After extensive discussion and community input, we developed an expansion approach that emphasized controlled growth and quality preservation. Rather than immediately opening a second full-scale center, we would first extend our existing location to include dedicated infant and toddler programs, age groups we hadn't initially served, but for which parents frequently requested care. This thoughtful expansion required additional staff recruitment, with particular emphasis on maintaining our intergenerational approach. The infant and toddler programs especially benefited from the nurturing presence of older caregivers, many of them retired nurses, pediatric professionals, and experienced parents whose gentle confidence with newborns provided reassurance to first-time parents. "There's something incredibly comforting about leaving my baby with someone who has raised multiple children successfully," one young mother commented during our parent feedback session. "The professional credentials matter, but that lived experience is irreplaceable, especially for nervous first-time parents like us." This validation of experiential knowledge alongside formal training represented exactly the balance we had sought to create. A model that valued both innovative techniques and time-tested wisdom, recognizing their complementary strengths rather than positioning them as competing approaches. As the center's national recognition grew through the documentation project and journal publications, I received an unexpected invitation to testify before a state legislative committee examining quality standards for early childhood education programs. The committee was particularly interested in our staffing model as a potential approach to both workforce development and quality improvement. Your center has demonstrated remarkable outcomes in both child development metrics and staff satisfaction, noted the committee chair during my testimony. We're particularly interested in understanding how your intergenerational staffing approach might be adapted for wider implementation across our state's early education system. The opportunity to influence policy represented another evolution in this journey, from personal response to dismissal to potential systemic impact on how educational programs approach staffing and qualifications. My testimony emphasized the importance of recognizing diverse forms of expertise, creating flexible credential pathways that honor experience alongside formal education, and developing mentoring structures that facilitate knowledge transfer across generations. The conventional emphasis on youth and recent training as primary qualifications for childcare work overlooks the tremendous value of life experience, practical wisdom, and relational skills that often increase with age, I explained to the committee. Our model demonstrates that the most effective learning environments combine the energy and current techniques of younger educators with the patience, perspective, and proven approaches of experienced caregivers. The legislative hearing generated significant media attention, bringing our intergenerational approach to an even wider audience. This publicity led to an unexpected personal opportunity, an invitation to write a book about generations learning, centers development and methodology, targeting both educational professionals and families interested in intergenerational approaches to childcare and early learning. At 75, I found myself embarking on yet another new professional adventure, working with an educational publisher to document the journey from personal dismissal to educational innovation. The book project allowed me to reflect more deeply on the principles underlying our approach and the broader implications for how society values contribution across the lifespan. The book shouldn't just document our specific program, Marjorie advised during our planning discussions. It should challenge fundamental assumptions about aging, capability, and the artificial segmentation of life stages that characterizes modern Western society. This broader framing resonated deeply with what I had learned throughout this journey, that the limitations we associate with age often reflect social constructs rather than actual capabilities, and that meaningful engagement remains possible and valuable throughout life when appropriate structures support continued contribution. As the book project progressed alongside the center's ongoing development, a particularly meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The State Association of Early Childhood Educators announced the creation of a new annual award, the Judith Anderson Intergenerational Excellence Award, honoring programs that successfully integrate experienced mentors with early career educators to enhance learning outcomes for children. This recognition isn't just about our specific center, I noted when informed of the award's creation. It's about validating an approach that honors contribution across the lifespan, recognizing that wisdom doesn't expire at some arbitrary age and that children benefit tremendously from interaction with adults at different life stages. The first ceremony presenting this award brought together education professionals from across the state, with Emma and Jack proudly accompanying me to see the recognition of what had begun as their grandmother's response to being deemed too old to care for them. Now 10 and 8 respectively, they had developed their own understanding of the center's significance. My grandma showed everybody that old people know important stuff, Jack explained to a reporter covering the event, his earnest delivery bringing laughter from those nearby. And now lots of kids get to learn from grandmas and grandpas, not just us. Emma, more attuned to social dynamics at her age, added her perspective. My mom used to think younger teachers were better because they knew newer things. But now she says the best learning happens when you have both kinds of teachers together. That's what our school does. Hearing my grandchildren articulate these insights with such clarity represented perhaps the most meaningful validation of all evidence that the core message about valuing wisdom across generations had reached even the youngest participants in our program. As we approach the 4th anniversary of Generations Learning Center, I find myself reflecting on the remarkable journey from dismissal to innovation. What began as a painful exclusion, being deemed too old to care for my own grandchildren, has evolved into an educational model that challenges fundamental assumptions about age, capability, and the transfer of knowledge between generations. The center now serves over 200 children across expanded programs, employs staff ranging from 21 to 83 years old, partners with multiple educational institutions for both research and practicum placements, and has been replicated in 7 communities across 3 states. The documentation project, funded by the National Education Foundation, has created resources that facilitate implementation of similar approaches nationwide, extending our impact far beyond what I could have imagined when this journey began. Most meaningful to me personally, however, is the transformation in my family relationships. Rebecca, whose dismissal of my capabilities initiated this entire journey, has become one of the center's most vocal advocates through her professional work. In educational marketing, Michael has expanded the financial advising portion of his practice to include retirement planning that emphasizes continued contribution rather than mere leisure, directly influenced by witnessing his mother's productive engagement in later life. Emma and Jack, now regular overnight visitors when their parents' work schedules require travel, delight in their special status at Grandma's school, while developing genuine appreciation for the wisdom shared by our older staff members and volunteers. Their understanding of aging has been shaped not by cultural stereotypes of decline and irrelevance, but by daily interaction with vibrant, engaged older adults making meaningful contributions. Yesterday, as I was helping Emma with a particularly challenging math assignment during one of our evening sessions, she looked up suddenly with the directness that children sometimes bring to profound observations. "Grandma, I'm really glad Mom and Dad were wrong about you being too old to take care of us," she said thoughtfully. "Otherwise, you might never have started the Learning Center, and lots of kids and teachers would have missed out on something really important." "Sometimes being underestimated is actually an opportunity," I told her, recognizing a teachable moment. "It pushes us to demonstrate capabilities others might not have recognized, even ones we ourselves might not have fully explored." She nodded with surprising maturity for a 10-year-old, like when my music teacher said I probably couldn't learn the hard piece for the recital, and that made me practice extra hard to prove I could? Exactly like that, I confirmed. The challenge is responding with creation rather than resentment, building something positive rather than just proving someone wrong. As Emma returned to her math problems with renewed determination, I reflected on how completely this philosophy had manifested through Generations Learning Center. What could have remained a personal grievance about being dismissed had transformed into an innovative educational approach, with impact extending far beyond my family or community. The inheritance that Frank had preserved for our grandchildren's education was now serving that purpose in ways neither of us could have anticipated, creating daily learning environments that enhanced not just Emma and Jack's development, but hundreds of other children's as well, while simultaneously providing meaningful engagement for experienced adults with wisdom to share. This evening, as I prepare notes for tomorrow's meeting with representatives from a national childcare association interested in our staffing model, I find myself returning to Frank's favorite observation about resources. Money isn't just currency, it's crystallized. Opportunity. How we allocate it reflects what we truly value. What began with Rebecca's dismissal, "My DIL said I was too old to babysit," has evolved into a powerful demonstration of what becomes possible when we reject arbitrary limitations and instead focus on creating opportunities that honor wisdom across generations. The inheritance that funded this journey has indeed become crystallized opportunity, not just for our family, but for an educational approach that continues expanding its reach and impact. Sometimes being underestimated is the beginning of your greatest contribution, a truth I hope remains part of the legacy Generations Learning Center creates for all who experience its unique approach to valuing wisdom across the lifespan. 5 years have passed since that pivotal moment when Rebecca and Michael told me I was too old to care for my grandchildren. At 78, I now find myself reflecting on how that painful dismissal became the catalyst for the most fulfilling chapter of my life. Today, Generations Learning Center has expanded to 3 locations across our state. Our model has been implemented in over 30 communities nationwide, and the book documenting our approach has become required reading in numerous early childhood education programs. What began as my personal response to being sidelined has evolved into a movement challenging fundamental assumptions about age, capability, and how wisdom is transferred between generations. Last month, I stood on a university stage receiving an honorary doctorate in education, a formal acknowledgement of contributions that began with the simple desire to remain connected to my grandchildren. As I looked out at the audience, I saw Rebecca and Michael sitting proudly in the front row, Emma and Jack beside them, now 12 and 10 respectively. Dr. Anderson's innovative approach to intergenerational learning has transformed how we understand both childcare quality and meaningful engagement. For older adults, the university president announced, her work demonstrates that our most significant social innovations often arise not from institutional initiatives, but from personal responses to life's challenges. The journey to this recognition was neither direct nor easy. Building and sustaining, Generations Learning Center required navigating complex regulations, addressing funding challenges, and continually adapting our approach based on research and experience. The physical demands occasionally tested the limits of my energy, requiring adjustments to my role as the years progressed. What sustained me throughout was witnessing the impact of our intergenerational approach, not just on the children we served, but on the older adults who found renewed purpose as wisdom mentors in our programs. Many had previously felt marginalized by retirement, their accumulated knowledge and experience suddenly deemed irrelevant in our youth-focused culture. At Generations, these same individuals thrived as valued contributors, sharing skills and perspectives that enriched children's development in ways purely theoretical education could not. Before joining Generations, I felt invisible, shared Martha, a retired librarian who now leads our literacy program at age 82. Now children actually run to greet me when I arrive, eager to hear stories and learn skills that connect them to history and traditions they might otherwise never encounter. The transformation in my family relationships remains perhaps the most meaningful outcome of this journey. Rebecca, whose dismissal of my capabilities initiated everything, has become one of the center's most passionate advocates. Her marketing firm now specializes in educational innovation, with a particular focus on programs that bridge generational divides. I've completely reconsidered what constitutes educational quality, Rebecca acknowledged during a recent interview for an education journal. The integration of experienced mentors with contemporary teaching approaches creates learning environments that neither could achieve independently. My mother-in-law's vision demonstrated this before research fully validated the approach. Michael, too, has evolved in his understanding of aging and capability. His financial planning practice now emphasizes what he calls contribution longevity, helping clients create retirement plans that maintain meaningful engagement rather than focusing exclusively on leisure. He regularly cites my experience as evidence that later life can be a time of innovation and impact rather than withdrawal from productive activity. Emma and Jack have grown up with a fundamentally different perspective on aging than many of their peers. Regular interaction with vibrant, engaged older adults through the center has shaped their understanding of later life as a period of continued contribution rather than decline. This perspective influences how they relate to older family members, teachers, and community members. With respect for experience, rather than dismissal of relevance. My friends think it's weird when their grandparents don't know about technology or current trends, Emma observed recently. But at Generations, we learn that different generations know different important things. It's better when we share knowledge. Instead of thinking only new things matter, the center's educational outcomes have consistently exceeded expectations. Children who participate in our programs demonstrate advanced social-emotional development, stronger intergenerational communication skills, and greater empathy compared to peers in more age-segregated environments. These benefits extend across socioeconomic backgrounds, with our scholarship program ensuring accessibility to families with limited resources. Our staff retention rates surpass industry standards, with many educators citing the mentoring relationships with experienced colleagues as key to their professional satisfaction and growth. Young teachers particularly value the practical guidance that complements their theoretical training, helping them navigate classroom challenges that textbooks alone cannot address. I learned more in 6 months, working alongside Mrs. Rodriguez, than in 2 years of education courses, one young teacher shared during our staff appreciation event. She helps me understand not just what teaching strategies work, but why they work with different children and how to adapt them for individual needs. The inheritance that funded our initial development has multiplied its impact beyond what Frank could have imagined when establishing the trust for our grandchildren's education. Through the Center's Scholarship Foundation and educational initiatives, hundreds of children beyond our immediate family have benefited from enhanced learning opportunities. The financial model has proven sustainable, generating resources that support both ongoing operations and expansion to new communities. Last year brought an unexpected full-circle moment when Rebecca was offered a significant promotion that would require extensive international travel. Without hesitation, she and Michael asked if I would provide regular overnight care for Emma and Jack during her absences. There's simply no one we trust more with their well-being, Rebecca explained, without a trace of the concerns about my age or capabilities that had characterized our conversation 5 years earlier. They thrive with you in ways that no other caregiving arrangement has matched. This request represented the complete transformation of our family dynamic, from dismissal based on assumptions about age to explicit preference based on demonstrated capabilities and relationship quality. The children now spend several nights each month in my home, creating the kind of unhurried, deep connections that defined grandparent relationships before our culture became so age-segregated. As I look toward the future, I recognize that physical limitations will eventually require adjustments to my involvement with Generations Learning Center. Rather than fearing this evolution or denying its inevitability, I've worked with our advisory board to develop transition plans that honor the center's founding principles while allowing for new leadership to emerge. The true measure of any organization's sustainability isn't the founder's permanent presence, but the degree to which core values become embedded in its culture and systems, I explained during our strategic planning retreat. Our commitment to intergenerational wisdom must transcend any individual's involvement. This approach to succession planning reflects what I've learned throughout this journey, that leadership at any age involves both active contribution and thoughtful preparation for eventual transition. Rather than clinging to control, I'm focused on ensuring that the wisdom behind our approach continues guiding the organization even as specific roles evolve. The inheritance that made Generations Learning Center possible continues generating returns far beyond financial measures. When Frank established that trust for our grandchildren's education, neither of us could have anticipated how it would ultimately serve that purpose, creating learning environments that benefit not just Emma and Jack, but hundreds of children, while challenging limiting assumptions about capability across the lifespan. Yesterday, after finishing a heritage skills workshop with our newest group of students, I found Emma waiting outside the classroom. Now in middle school, she has developed a seriousness about educational matters that sometimes surprises me. "Grandma," she began with characteristic directness, "for my Future Leaders project, we have to interview someone who created positive change in the community. I want to interview you about how you started generations. I'd be honored, I told her. What aspects are you most interested in exploring? She considered the question with thoughtful precision, so like her mother in her analytical approach, yet with a warmth that reflected other influences as well. I want to understand how it felt when Mom and Dad said you were too old to take care of us, she replied. And how you decided to build something positive instead of just being angry. I think that's the most important part of the story. Her insight captured exactly what I hope remains after the practical details of our approach are adapted by others. Understanding that moments of dismissal can become catalysts for creation rather than bitterness, that being underestimated can spark innovation rather than resignation. As I approach my 80th birthday, I feel profound gratitude for the unlikely journey that transformed personal disappointment into community contribution. The inheritance that funded this adventure served its intended educational purpose in ways that extended far beyond conventional definitions, creating learning environments that honor wisdom across generations while challenging the artificial limitations we so often place on contribution at different life stages. My DIL said I was too old to babysit, so I started a daycare with her inheritance, began as a story of dismissal, but evolved into one of renewal, innovation, and intergenerational connection. Its legacy continues unfolding in ways I couldn't have imagined when this journey began, touching lives far beyond my family or community. Sometimes being underestimated is the beginning of your greatest contribution, an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities others failed to recognize, creating ripples of positive change that extend far beyond the initial moment of dismissal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.